சார் இப்படி வந்து சொல்லு.
Let's welcome our Honorable Minister, Dr. PTR Palanivelthiyagarajan.
சார் ஒயிடாக வந்தால் எல்லாம் எடுக்கலாம் சார். கிட்ட போயிடுச்சு சார். ஒயிடாக எல்லாம் ஒயிடாக வந்துருக்கலாம். கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சம் பின்னாடி எல்லாம் நல்லா ஒயிடாக.
Join us on the stage. Mr. Nasir Muhammad Harisa stage. To have our minister amidst us today and will share insights on Tamil Nadu's vision for a $1 trillion economy by 2030, how educational institutions and startups play a very crucial. In June 2017, he was appointed as the founding secretary of and undertaken the build-out of the party's technology platforms. Person for the DMK party, generally focusing on economic, central finances and policy matters. Thank you very much, sir, for your economical or financial status of Tamil Nadu, $1 trillion economy by 2030. Thank you very much, sir, today, and accepting our invitation to go for the protocols.
Sir, you studied in MIT, and of course MIT is one of the most well-known startup centers, the culture and everything. In our midst today, we have about 20 plus education institutions from all over the state, right, from Europe to Tinaveri to all over the represented. Do you think it's possible for us to duplicate or replicate the MIT model, the Stanford model, from whatever you've seen? Is that something we'll be able to widespread? Is there anything stopping us from doing it? At the end of the day, it's most of our talent. When we go to the faculty there and we see the heads of these institutions, it's just mostly Tamilians. I really want to say Indians. I see a lot of people from Tamil Nadu. So is it not possible for them to bring them back, or create the ecosystem here itself for us to take the story forward towards 1 trillion and then eventually 4 trillion? So it's just one question, sir.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, sir. I'm reminded that about 2 or 3 months ago I was invited to an exhibition. It was called South Asia and the Institute. And the Institute is how people refer to MIT in the US, or the MIT refers to itself as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And so it turns out the Institute, when it was set up in whatever, 18 something, within like 10 years or 12 years of it being set up, actually Indian students and Pakistani students, well now Pakistani, then Indian, were attending them. And they were not formally admitted, but they were allowed to study alongside, and then like 20 or 30 years later they started getting formal admission and all that. And so there's a long history of association of brilliant students who studied there, then came back, contributed hugely to the cause here of nationalism, of nation building, of company creation, of many things. And also the role of MIT in setting up the IITs is actually humongous. I didn't realize this, but the first IIT was set up at Kanpur or something like that, and it was set under a State Department of the United States grant, where they sent a bunch of faculty from the US to help set up technology institutions here in the 60s. And many of those people, including the main person who actually was here for the longest time, was an MIT professor. And so what they felt was that the talent was of course second to none, but what it required to set up institutions like that was to have the right culture. That is certainly true. I think what distinguishes great institutions from mediocre ones is this ephemeral notion of what is the culture. A culture where freedom exists, where intellect is valued, where boundaries are not set anywhere except in your mind, where excellence is encouraged. These kinds of things is what I think collectively can be called culture, and culture defines, I think, these institutions of excellence. And so that exhibition was really heartening for me. I think it may be still ongoing. It's at the IIT archives here in IIT Madras. Probably less than a month ago, I forget, but recent. And their idea was, of course, that you can replicate these. That's why they came here to do it. And that's, in some ways, I would say, at least the original 4 or 5 IITs have proven that it can be done. And it wasn't that they came here and it was their money that did it or their equipment that did it. It was the culture that they embedded, the practices that they had at MIT, at Harvard, at Stanford, and they came and implemented institutions with those practices. In fact, back then, this gentleman, I forget his name, this professor, this MIT guy who was actually driving all of this, he has observed in 1960, he says the problem here is the social structure, that you have these upper and lower castes and all this stuff, and this is actually not conducive to human development or pure intellectual progress. And so we'll have to customize our cultural approach to ensuring that everybody's included and everybody. I mean, he's had the foresight to see that. I suppose in their own way they have to deal with the history of racism and slavery and all that. So it wasn't that rocket science for him. But so that, if I put all of it together, I say to reach true excellence is really about a mindset. I think if I look at incubation centers, I've been to the IIT Madras Research Park a few times. Actually, it is a joint venture between the government of Tamil Nadu, whose land it's functioning on, and IIT Madras, and some of our IAS officers sit on the board. But what appeals to me when I go there is that you would never know there was any hand of any government in it. It doesn't behave like a government institution, doesn't behave with the normal bureaucracies and the protocols, and you go there, and in my mind, I said the first time I went there, I said this feels like any incubator anywhere in the Bay Area or in the Boston area or in the New York area, where people feel they are only limited by their own ability and by their own imagination, and otherwise whatever they can think of they can do. That culture you bring to either an innovation center or an educational institution, then you will see the kind of benefits of it. Sadly, in our country, I think the notion of the state intrudes into these things. Even now, if you look, in the progression of what has happened to the IITs, they have become politicized and kind of fanaticized. And you're seeing, directors of IITs talk about the benefits of cow urine and stuff like that, right? So I think, there's an old kind of chicken or egg question. It says, do good institutions build prosperous societies? Meaning good institutions, therefore good democracies build prosperous societies. Or do prosperous societies build or encourage or engender good institutions? And I think this was not so clear till about 10, 15, 20 years ago. But now we have seen the answer is very clear. The more you have apolitical, counterbalancing, well-designed institutions that ensure level playing fields, that ensure freedom of expression, that ensure smooth societies without dominance of anybody and suppression of somebody else, the more likely you will have a prosperous society. And even prosperous societies, if they let the institutions start to decay, will start to see a decline of their prosperity. That's what we're seeing in the West now, we're seeing in the US, we're seeing in the UK. So if I say that's true for society, I also say that's true for institutions, academic institutions. The extent to which extraneous variables like politics, like government are kept out, the more likely you can build institutions of excellence like a Stanford or a MIT or a Caltech. And even there, people would probably say that Caltech is a better pure science school, and even in places like Stanford and MIT, some kind of other things creep in. But relative to the rest of the world, they're still relatively pristine, right? They're pure focus. So I don't know if that's an answer, but it's just my thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, sir. That's wonderfully answered. I think that answers the question. Thank you.
I think it's a very interesting topic, and as usual, Mr. Amit Bari has laid it very clearly what has been and what is possible. And what is possible, of course, quantitatively is one thing. What is possible in terms of Unnada Tamilagam is a different question. So maybe I'll take this in parts, right? I would say growth is defined in different areas by different macro trends. For example, if you're a commodity-based economy, then of course where the commodity cycle is, which tends to be long duration, 20, 30, 50-year cycles, relative value of different commodities, those determine a lot of your outcomes. If you're a particular kind of skill or talent, as I think the prime example in our lifetimes is China, where China went from being roughly the same per capita income of India in 1990, in fact slightly lower than us in 1990, and then in 2 decades became somewhere between 3 to 5 times us. On one simple kind of trajectory, they became the manufacturing center of the world. And they did it faster, better, more reliably, and with some other macro trends that happened at the same time, which is the integration of the global economy through a more effective WTO and free trade, and also through improved logistics and reliability of supply chains, and the ability to do just-in-time supply across a global supply chain network where, for example, cars being manufactured in or assembled in California could be getting their engines from China on a just-in-time basis. So the improvement in the application of technology, the improvement in logistics, the integration of the global economy, those were the catalysts or the wind behind the move. But the move was very clear. 100% almost of all the new manufacturing capability in the world went to China. China used all their excess profits to build reserves, but also to do massive capital investment, unprecedented in the history of the world, massive capital investment into their own country, thereby producing capacity, thereby producing infrastructure, better logistics, better shipment, etc. I don't think there's any example in the world of that scale where you can take over 1 billion people up by that much wealth in that little time. Unprecedented creation of wealth in the history of the world. So there's that model. Of course, over time, we look and we see different parts of the world emerge to be relatively very wealthy, very powerful. There was the era of the Roman Empire, there was the colonial era. In fact, as many of you will know because you're learned people, this notion of globalization is not a kind of secular monotonic trend. Globalization increases, fragmentation increases, globalization increases, fragmentation increases. There's been at least 3 or 4 major cycles in recorded history. We are seeing now the fragmentation going on in various ways. But in my view, I think if India has any kind of potential to be either 27 trillion or 40 trillion. It is driven on only one dimension, and that dimension is on human capital. There is no other place in the world today that has this volume of people with this potential to become very productive and the engine of global growth. So I say this many places, so I say it again here. Roughly about 1 in 6 people alive on the planet today is Indian. If I take out the aging populations of much of the West, including, of course, Western Europe, but also non-US advanced countries, and if I include an aging China, of course, extremely aging countries like Japan, which are not that big by volume, only about 100 plus million people, then of those that are in the workforce today and likely to be in the workforce in the future, let's say for the next 20 years, 1 in 5 is Indian. Then I take out all those people ex-India, because it's a bit of a nuanced definition, but bear with me. If I take those people outside of India who are living in countries where there's such great strife, there's war, there's famine, there's military rule, there's all kinds of problems that prevent normal societal evolution, and so a lot of young people cannot go to school, cannot attain basic literacy, cannot be given basic skills, largely in Africa and other parts of that part of the world. Now we're looking at something like 1 in 4 people from today for the next 20 years in the potential workforce of the world that is of the right age and with the ability to get the right education is going to be Indian. That is a massive, massive aberration. Nobody designed for it. Every country did its own policies. China, in retrospect, shot itself in the foot with their one-child policy. India, in retrospect, its ability to fail at many things, including population control, including growth in the northern states, has left us in a situation where we have inadvertently arrived at this 1 in 4 kind of scenario. Now, of course, it's a bit of a nuanced problem, because those of you who are more kind of discerning will notice that I glossed over the fact there are even parts of India where a lot of these people are not getting access to basic education, and they're not getting a shot at kind of being productive members of today's kind of economy. So if I bring all of that together, I would say, in fact, I have greater conviction that Tamil Nadu will be 10 or more % of India's GDP than I have that the Indian GDP will reach 2017. And it's not the brilliance of my government or my party or anything like that. It's just the human capital and the century of focus on education and inclusion and the society that we have evolved over this time. So the real question then is, if Tamil Nadu will be 8 plus, let's even say 10 plus safely, of 2047, what is it that we need to do to maximize the numerical value of that 10 plus %? And what role will both educational institutions and startups or new technology have to play in that? And that's the topic given to me today. I think it is beyond a doubt that productivity is the actual efficient frontier. A society that has productivity per capita increasing and high, or high and increasing, is probably the safest bet in terms of broader investment, targeted returns, outcomes, etc. And to have a society that has high and increasing productivity, you need to have actually 2 things. One is a social structure, a fabric, a model of governance, a system that allows for human talent to actually focus on the important things, on education, on awareness, on skill, on production, on delivery, and not focus on unnecessary things like, at worst, social strife and crime, or less harmful things like bureaucratic red tape and inefficiency and systemic weaknesses. So, in that sense, as much as there is a role for the government of the day and the politics of the day to help society, to help the structure, to help the system be more, even in a shout out to my opposition party, currently the state's opposition party, then former Chief Minister and leader of the party used to say, Amaidi, Valam, Valarchi. So, a calm, peaceful, equitable, harmonious society, everything starts with that. And then you have all these other things that lead to growth, you have prosperity. So, there is a role for government. There is a clear role both in terms of keeping the social structure and the fabric and equitable access and so forth, but also in terms of reducing rent seeking, reducing bottlenecks, reducing friction costs, what is otherwise glibly called ease of doing business, but effectively to reduce. Even this morning, the event for which I missed being here in the morning was a budget, or rather a discussion with stakeholders related to the form presentation of the budget coming next month. And there I said, in many cases, if you look at the IT sector, unlike the tens of cases of subsidies that are brought by the Industries Department every day, every cabinet, every month, there's been a huge boom in the IT sector in Tamil Nadu in the last 5-7 years, but particularly in the last 2-3 years. In fact, if you look at the headcount employment of things like GCCs, the numbers are up 55-60% between when we took office at the end of COVID and now. 99% plus of that came without 1 rupee of subsidy. So in many cases, the job of the government is just to get out of the way. We don't have to ask for extra permits. We don't have to give, additional clearances. We shouldn't be trying to make them come to, get some other piece of paper. And this is true of firms as it is true of individuals. Certainly when I was in finance, I was pushing hard to reduce citizen government staff interaction. I said as much of this should be moved online as possible. And if we can't get people to do it from their phones, then they do it at e-survey centers. If they can't do it at e-survey centers, then we send the government staff to their house. And we basically reduce the interaction of human beings with government staff. That brings all manner of multiplication of efficiency and reduction of friction and rent seeking. That's true for individuals, it's true for companies as well. So, we have a role to play. But having put all of that important thing into one bucket, I say the other vital role is for educational institutions, because educational institutions are what shape the productivity of the youth and the next generation, all else being equal. Leave the government as is, assuming it's doing its job properly, then it's the educational institutions that are actually making the difference. And their role becomes even more vital when we look at the speed at which what is the cutting edge of technology or what is the most recent kind of innovation, that half-life is now like months or weeks in some cases. And the stark example is, all of you can remember the big buzz when OpenAI released its ChatGPT 4 and how much that changed the world. And how long did that last? About a year and a half, and all of a sudden here you have DeepSeek that in the course of 3 days or 4 days wipes out $1 trillion of market cap from all the tech companies, and they can do faster and better, cheaper what OpenAI says they can do, right? And so you find that this, what used to be 10-15 years of one kind of S-curve, and then it reaches maturation, and then the next one. This has been compressing. And so that means the educational models need to keep moving that fast. And so the role of education institutions, which has been vital, as I said at the beginning, from the fact that 100 plus years ago, the first Justice Party government here mandated compulsory elementary education for boys and girls in 1921. And today, we have this great luxury of something north of 87-88% of girls are graduating high school, as opposed to even advanced states like Gujarat, where that number is 50% or less. And then you have the kind of weaker states in the north, where that number is probably 25% or less. So, education all the way from proper elementary education, which is the foundation, because education is a bit like a string. If you don't start at one end, you can't get to the other end unless you have done the basics right in elementary. They're no good in secondary. Unless they've got good secondary, they can't get good tertiary. Of course, you can teach some skills. You can be a good plumber or a mechanic or even to some extent a hardware technician, a computer, without having had very much proper education in other ways. But that's like rolling the dice. Overall, as policy, it's very important to us that we do the building blocks properly, especially if the top keeps changing, then at least the foundation needs to be strong enough to keep adapting as the top keeps changing. So, this importance of educational institutions is so high, and if you take our government, we have one classic example where we invest a lot. In my department, we have something called the ICT Academy. It is intended to be a training academy in information communications technology. 15-year-old effort started partly with funding from the government of India. They've offered it to many states. They offered it all states. Many states took it up. Some did okay with it, some failed with it. Tamil Nadu is by far the best example. Our entity now is, and across all governments, I don't take personal credit for it, I'm saying over 15 years. Our entity now is so good that it has offices in 10 states. We have about 1,700 plus colleges and universities that have signed up with us so that we can give them that last mile skill training, much of it online, some of it with human staff. And our flagship conferences, which we run about 10 or 12 a year, they're called bridge conferences. And what are they intended to bridge? They're intended to bridge universities and colleges with industry, so that whatever the current needs of the industries, whatever the current skills are, whatever the latest tools in any product or any technology are, those are impressed upon both the placement offices of all these institutions, but also the curriculum setters of all these institutions. Now, because of a bit of the archaic system that we have, where the curriculum leading to a degree has to go through all kinds of approval processes, and people like the UGC are used as political weapons to try and drive kind of, unwanted and unthoughtful, to be diplomatic, agendas. But you leave that aside, even in the state of Tamil Nadu, colleges don't have that much freedom to keep shaping their curriculum without having to go to some bureaucratic process of some university where they have to give things like equivalent certificates and all this nonsense. So the system is not efficient. But at least we bridge that gap. What is it that the world is doing now and what it needs from people entering the workforce, and how is that likely to change in the near future? We can't tell the far future away. And those who are actually running these institutions, setting the curriculum, running the placement cells, helping students figure it out. So I think this is just an example, one, but much more of that needed. So if I was to sum it up, I'd say as much as the role of government in keeping, healthy minds, healthy bodies, calm society, relative ease of doing business is important towards achieving this goal, there's a huge onus on educational institutions to keep the curriculum of the education and to keep the skill set that graduates come with when they walk out to be closer and closer to what the market needs. And then the whole question is, what is the role of innovation and startups? And I think that is a no-brainer, because I just said this again this morning at the government meeting. I'm not sure that people appreciated it, but I'll say it again. Think about it. We are something like a $350 billion or something. Now, it's a bit dicey when we start doing all these things in dollars, because the rate at which our rupee is declining, the goal is shifting rapidly, right, in rupee terms, because I think we started at 80 or 81 rupees, now we're at like 87 rupees. So 1 trillion looks more like 87 lakh crore rather than 80 lakh crore. But nevertheless, whatever that is, 80, 82, 84, 87, I doubt it's coming back to 65, but whatever it is, the odds that we're going to get there from here in 6 years, if 2030 is the ambition, or 5 years now, we must confess is relatively low, right? I mean, at least on the trajectory that we are, if we're growing notional in 13-15%, we have probably mathematically already lost the fight, right? Unless you can see something dramatic change. And so the only way that we are likely to see a step change, as I said, as much as human capital is important, is that you're going to come up with some kind of relatively infinitely scalable, relatively globally impactful technology innovation. That's about the only way you can make a lot of money and a lot of progress quickly. It's about the only field you can do it in. I mean, I suppose we could find huge deposits of oil or gold, and that could help us, but I'm not sure that that's in the realm of immediate prospects. But if absent those kinds of things, then the only way you're going to get there, increasing the rate that you're at right now, is to, because if it's 13 or 15% real, by the time you take out inflation, it's like 7-8%. And if you try to project forward at 8% into trillions of dollars, or into $1 trillion, by then the rupee may be 95 or 98 or 100, we don't know. So, if you do all the math, really you're better off kind of looking at real growth rates rather than nominal growth rates, because nominal growth rates may go high your way because of inflation, but they'll also weaken the rupee and higher the target in dollar terms. So if you're really looking to get to about 10% real growth, that's what you require to get to somewhere around 1 trillion, assuming there's some equitable movement of the currency relative to the whole Rudy Dornbush kind of theory of interest rates and inflation and foreign exchange rates. So if you need to get to 10% real growth, that is not going to be done by incremental increases in almost anything. It needs step function, it needs leap, it needs scalability, it needs relatively large market application beyond the state of Tamil Nadu, beyond the country of India, to a global level. So again, I would say the best path for that, in fact, probably the only path for that, is through innovation, through startups. We have seen a few unicorns, a few billion-dollar companies in the AI space, in the energy space. A friend of mine just signed yesterday or this week for the E-plane company, which is incubated at IIT Madras Research Park, $1 billion order for air ambulances. But you need something like this. You need to find some big game-changing technologies that can be scaled and that have a market beyond the local market. So I think it's almost like setting me up with an easy topic where Mr. Buhari gives me the title, how EIs and startups will play a crucial role in the 1 trillion economy, because actually there's no other way without these two doing well, in my limited understanding of the world. There's no other way we get to 1 trillion with any certainty, because it's a shifting target. If we look at it based on rupees, it's a shifting target that's already moved from probably 80 lakh crore economy when it was first stated, 3 years ago, or 2.5, 3 years ago, to now 87 lakh crore economy, and we're probably about 28 to 30 lakh crore right now. So, that's a lot to do in 5 years or slightly less than 5 years. Again, 2030 January or 2030 December will make a difference. So, still we'll have to think about that. But anyway, I think therefore that institutions like this, I think in fact the even finer kind of bridge of institutions like your incubation center, which is exemplary and does wonderful work and provides an automatic path for the talent without having to go seek the funding and the kind of incubation elsewhere. The Innovation and Incubation Center that you have here will play a vital role, will be in fact indispensable, and the more such efforts we can have around the state, the more likely we are to achieve this ambitious vision. So I think with that I will conclude my remarks. I apologize once again for the change in time and the delay, and I thank you again for inviting me to be part of this day-long event, and I commend the UEF for their ongoing brilliant work over the years. Thank you very much.